What happens when arrogance meets quiet power at 35,000 feet? On a transatlantic flight, a wealthy passenger in first class openly mocks a humbly dressed black woman in an economy seat, believing her to be insignificant. The flight crew, intimidated by the rich woman's threats, does little to intervene. They see a socialite versus a nobody. But they have no idea that the silent woman in coach holds the fate of everyone on that plane, and the airline itself in her hands. This isn't just a story about a flight. It's about a reckoning. Stay tuned to discover the shocking moment of truth that left an entire crew speechless and delivered a brutal lesson in judging a book by its cover. The first-class lounge at JFK's Terminal 4 was a hushed sanctuary of muted tones and expensive perfume. Here, the chaos of travel was a distant rumor replaced by the gentle clinking of ice in glasses and the whisper of leather as patrons settled into oversized armchairs. It was a world designed to insulate, to cosset, to confirm the status of those within its walls. And no one inhabited this world more loudly than Tiffany Sterling. She wasn't sitting so much as holding court from a plush velvet sofa, one leg shod in a 5-inch Christian Louboutin heel, crossed elegantly over the other. Her platinum blonde hair was a marvel of engineering, and her fingers, adorned with a collection of Cartier and Harry Winston rings, danced over the screen of the latest iPhone. Her voice, however, was anything but muted. It sliced through the serene atmosphere like a diamond drill. "No, Derek. I told you the Monaco deal is non-negotiable." She brayed into her phone, oblivious to the sideways glances from other passengers. If they can't meet our price, they can go build their tacky little casino with someone else. Daddy didn't build Sterling & Sons by accepting lowball offers, and neither will I. Across the lounge, partially obscured by a large fiddle-leaf fig, Serafina Hayes watched and listened. To anyone who bothered to look, she was a stark contrast to the glittering spectacle of Tiffany Sterling. Serafina was dressed in simple, comfortable black trousers, a soft grey cashmere sweater, and practical flats. Her hair was styled in neat, elegant locks, pulled back from her face. There was no flashy jewelry, no designer handbag screaming its brand name. On her lap rested a well-read paperback novel, its spine creased with use. She hadn't ordered champagne. A simple cup of black coffee sat on the small table beside her. She was the kind of person who was professionally invisible, a skill she had cultivated over many years. People's eyes tended to slide right over her, dismissing her as unimportant. It was a superpower, and today it was serving its purpose perfectly. The boarding call for Aura Wings Flight 712 to London Heathrow echoed musically through the lounge. Tiffany snapped her phone shut and gathered her things with an air of profound impatience. She swept past Serafina's seat, without a glance, her expensive fragrance trailing in her wake like a chemical contrail. Serafina waited until the priority boarding announcement was nearly over before closing her book and heading to the gate. She joined the long, winding queue for economy, standing patiently between a young couple buzzing with excitement for their first trip abroad and a weary-looking family trying to wrangle 3 small children. When she finally reached the jet bridge, she saw Tiffany again. The first-class passenger was holding up the line, arguing heatedly with the lead flight attendant, a man in his late 40s with a name tag that read, Mark. "What do you mean you don't have the 2008 vintage Dom Perignon, Tiffany?" demanded her voice, sharp enough to etch glass. My assistant specifically confirmed it. "This is Aura Wings, not some budget cattle car. I am in Suite 1A, in Suite. I expect a certain level of service." Mark, the flight attendant, wore a practiced, pasted-on smile, but his eyes were tight with stress. "Ma'am, I do apologize. It seems there was a last-minute catering change. We have a wonderful Veuve Clicquot, La Grande Dame, from 2012, which I'm sure you'll find. Do I look like I want to be sure? Tiffany interrupted, her lip curling. I want what I requested. Get on the phone. Fix it. She punctuated her sentence by thrusting her boarding pass at him, then swept past him into the plane without waiting for a reply. Mark's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He took a deep breath and turned to the next passenger, his professional mask back in place. Welcome aboard. Serafina handed him her boarding pass. Seat 34B, a middle seat in economy. Mark gave her a cursory glance, a polite but impersonal nod, and gestured her forward. She was just another face in the herd. As she made her way down the narrow aisle, she passed the opulent first-class cabin. The suites were enclosed pods of cream leather and polished burr wood. In Suite 1A, Tiffany was already on the phone again, complaining loudly about the incompetent staff. As Serafina squeezed past, Tiffany looked up, her gaze raking over Serafina's simple attire. A smirk of pure, unadulterated disdain spread across her face. Tiffany didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She simply let out a short, sharp laugh, a little puff of condescending air that was more insulting than any slur. It was a laugh that said, "Look at you shuffling back to the cheap seats where you belong." It was a laugh that dismissed Serafina's entire existence as something shabby and pathetic. Serafina met her gaze for a brief moment. She didn't scowl or react. She simply held her stare, her dark eyes calm and analytical. Then she continued her journey toward the back of the plane, the sound of that cruel little laugh echoing in her ears. She found her seat 34B and settled in between the young man from the couple she'd seen in line and a burly businessman who immediately claimed both armrests. She buckled her seatbelt, opened her book, and began to read. But she wasn't just reading. She was observing. She was listening. She was collecting data. The first phase of her audit had just begun. The initial ascent of the Airbus A350 was smooth, a powerful and graceful climb into the darkening twilight over the Atlantic. In economy, passengers settled in for the long haul, the cabin lights dimming to a soothing blue. But any sense of calm was routinely shattered by the frequent and demanding call bell from Suite 1A. Tiffany Sterling was treating the flight not as a journey, but as a 6-hour, all-inclusive luxury resort where the staff existed solely for her whims. First, the cabin was too warm. Then it was too cold. The complimentary noise-cancelling headphones were not up to her standards. She demanded to know if they had a specific Bose model. They did not. This prompted a sigh so loud and theatrical it could be heard 3 rows back. Mark, the lead flight attendant, seemed to have been assigned to her personally, his trips to the first-class galley becoming more frequent, and his smile growing more strained with each summons. A younger flight attendant, Chloe, who had a kind face and an eagerness to please, was also drawn into Tiffany's orbit. This is simply unacceptable. Tiffany's voice carried from the galley during a consultation over the meal service. The lobster is farmed, not wild-caught Atlantic lobster. What is the point of flying if you can't maintain a certain standard? From her seat in row 34. Serafina could hear snippets of the drama. She watched as Chloe scurried back and forth, her expression a mixture of anxiety and awe at Tiffany's sheer audacity. Mark, on the other hand, was all appeasement. "We'll see what we can do, Miss Sterling." "Of course, Miss Sterling." "Right away, Miss Sterling." An hour into the flight, during the dinner service, Tiffany made a trip to the first-class lavatory. On her way back, The plane experienced a brief moment of light turbulence. The seatbelt sign was on, but Tiffany paid it no mind. She stumbled, her hand flying out to brace herself against the top of a seat. The seat happened to be 34A, right next to Serafina. The young man in the seat flinched. Tiffany regained her balance and glared down as if the seat itself had offended her. Her eyes then fell upon Serafina, who was calmly eating her standard economy meal of chicken and rice. "Oh, honestly," Tiffany said, wrinkling her nose in disgust. "They really pack you people in back here, don't they?" "Like sardines." She looked at Serafina's meal tray. "I can't believe you're eating that. I wouldn't feed that to my dog." A ripple of uncomfortable silence spread through the nearby rows. Passengers stared at their screens or into their laps, not wanting to get involved. Serafina carefully placed her fork down. She looked up at Tiffany, her expression unreadable. "The crew works very hard to serve hundreds of passengers, ma'am." Serafina said, her voice even and low. "I'm sure it's the best they can provide under the circumstances." The ma'am was delivered with perfect politeness, yet it seemed to enrage Tiffany. It was the address of a subordinate, and Tiffany clearly believed Serafina was nothing if not that. "The best they can provide," Tiffany scoffed, her voice rising. "Darling, people like you wouldn't know the best if it sat on your face. You're happy with bread and circuses. That's why you're back here and I'm up there." She gestured vaguely towards the front of the plane with a diamond-encrusted hand. Chloe, who was nearby with the drink cart, rushed over. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" "The captain has asked that all passengers remain seated." Tiffany waved a dismissive hand at her. "I'm fine. I was just making an observation about the stark realities of air travel." She gave Serafina one last look, a mixture of pity and contempt, then turned on her heel and strutted back to her suite. Chloe looked at Serafina, her eyes full of apology. "I'm so sorry about that," she whispered. Serafina gave her a small, reassuring smile. "It's not your fault. You're handling a difficult situation very professionally." The compliment seemed to surprise Chloe. She flushed slightly. "Thank you. Can I get you another drink? A coffee?" "A glass of water would be lovely. Thank you, Chloe." "Serafina," said deliberately, using her name. Chloe's eyes widened slightly that Serafina had remembered it. She nodded quickly and hurried off. A few moments later, she returned with a glass of water, a linen napkin, and a small package of premium shortbread biscuits, the kind usually reserved for premium economy. She placed them on Serafina's tray with a conspiratorial wink. Serafina nodded her thanks. The small act of kindness did not go unnoticed, nor did the larger acts of malice. As the flight continued across the vast, dark ocean, Serafina felt the intricate social ecosystem of the aircraft crystallize around her. There was the abuser, Tiffany, the enabler, Mark, whose professionalism was a thin veneer over a desire to avoid conflict at all costs. The quiet resistor, Chloe, who used small kindnesses to push back. And then there were the dozens of silent witnesses, the other passengers who just wanted a quiet flight. Serafina knew this flight was a microcosm of the entire company she had just acquired, and it was becoming increasingly clear that the turbulence wasn't just in the air, it was in the very soul of Aura Wings. 3 hours into the flight, as the plane cruised silently over the mid-Atlantic, a new crisis erupted from Suite 1A. This time, it was a technological one. A piercing shriek, followed by an enraged shout of "useless," echoed from the front cabin. Mark, who had been enjoying a rare moment of peace, sighed and began the familiar walk of shame toward Tiffany's suite. "What seems to be the trouble now, Ms. Sterling?" he asked, his voice dripping with forced patience. "My screen!" she snapped, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the large, high-definition monitor built into her suite's wall. "It's frozen. I was in the middle of a bidding war for a vintage Chanel bag on Sotheby's online, and your ancient technology just died on me. I'm probably going to lose it now. This is going to cost me thousands." Mark peered at the screen. It displayed a frozen image of a quilted handbag. The system was completely unresponsive. "My apologies, Miss Sterling. Let me try rebooting the system for your suite." He went to the crew control panel and initiated the reset sequence for Suite 1A. After a few minutes, the screen flickered back to life, displaying the Aura Wings logo, before freezing again on the exact same frame. He tried it twice more with the same result. Chloe joined him, her brow furrowed with concern. "It's not working. The hard reset isn't responding." Mark muttered, his frustration starting to show. It must be a localized hardware fault. He turned back to Tiffany. "Ma'am, it appears your system has malfunctioned. I am terribly sorry. We can offer you complimentary champagne and a voucher for your next flight as compensation for the inconvenience." This was, to put it mildly, the wrong thing to say. A voucher. Tiffany screeched, standing up so fast she almost hit her head. "Are you kidding me? I don't want a voucher to fly on your decrepit airline again. I want a working entertainment system. I am paying a fortune for this seat. What is the captain going to do about this?" The threat was clear. Invoking the captain was the nuclear option for irate passengers. Mark paled slightly. "The captain is currently managing the flight, ma'am. This isn't a safety-critical system. It's critical to me," she shot back. The commotion was loud enough to draw the attention of nearby passengers, including Serafina. She had been half listening while reading her book. Her previous career before she had inherited, and then massively grown, her father's investment firm had been in aerospace engineering. She had worked on the software integration for the very entertainment systems used on this model of Airbus. Serafina unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. She walked calmly to the front, stopping at the edge of the first-class cabin, where Chloe and Mark stood, looking helpless. "Excuse me," she said quietly. Mark turned, his expression annoyed at the intrusion from an economy passenger. "Ma'am, please return to your seat." Serafina ignored him and addressed Chloe directly, her voice calm and authoritative. "Did you try a soft reset from the local terminal, or just the hard reset from the master panel?" Chloe looked confused. I think he just did the master panel reset." Serafina nodded. "That often fails if there's a persistent cache error in the seat's local software module. Constant streaming, like for an online auction, can sometimes cause a memory leak that a hard reset doesn't clear." Mark stared at her dumbfounded. "Who are you?" "A passenger," Serafina replied evenly. She then gave Chloe a simple instruction. "There's a small unmarked panel just under the screen to the right. You'll need a pen tip to press the recessed button inside. Press and hold it for exactly 10 seconds. It will purge the local cache and force a clean boot. The master reset just cuts and restores power. It doesn't clear the memory." Tiffany scoffed from her seat. "Oh, brilliant. We're taking technical advice from the cheap seats now. Are you going to offer to hit it with a hammer next, Chloe?" However, looked from Serafina's confident face to Mark's bewildered one. She was desperate for a solution. She grabbed a pen from her pocket, located the tiny, almost invisible panel, and pressed the button. She counted to 10 under her breath, then released it. The screen went black for a moment, then flickered to life with the Aura Wings logo. This time, however, it didn't freeze. The full interactive menu loaded perfectly. A collective sigh of relief went through the small galley. Chloe looked at Serafina, her eyes wide with astonishment. How did you know that I used to work with these systems? Serafina said, simply offering no further explanation. Tiffany, momentarily silenced, quickly recovered. A lucky guess, she declared, though with noticeably less conviction. She immediately turned her attention back to the screen, frantically logging back into the auction. Serafina gave Chloe a small nod and turned to walk back to her seat. Mark watched her go, a storm of confusion and suspicion brewing behind his eyes. Who was this woman in 34B economy passengers weren't supposed to know about recessed maintenance buttons and software cache errors? They weren't supposed to be more knowledgeable than the crew. For the first time, all flight, Mark saw Serafina, not as a piece of the background, but as a question. And he suddenly felt an urgent need to find the answer. The incident with the entertainment system had fundamentally shifted the dynamic of the flight. Tiffany Sterling, though her problem was solved, was now sullen and quiet, occasionally shooting venomous glares toward the economy cabin. The crew, particularly Mark, was unsettled. Mark retreated to the small crew rest area at the back of the plane, ostensibly to prepare for the next service, but really to process what had just happened. An economy passenger had, in 30 seconds, solved a problem that he and the airline's own troubleshooting guide couldn't fix. It wasn't just what she knew, it was how she knew it. The quiet confidence, the precise terminology, the air of authority she had projected for that brief moment, it was completely at odds with her passenger profile. Driven by a new and gnawing curiosity, he booted up the crew's tablet and accessed the flight's electronic passenger manifest. He scrolled down to seat 34B. Hayes Serafina, Economy, ticket number 784-219-8845-12. No special meal requests, no frequent flyer number listed. It was the most generic, unremarkable passenger profile imaginable. No status, no history, with the airline, nothing. It was a digital dead end. He felt a pang of disappointment. Maybe it really was just a lucky guess. Maybe she was a retired IT technician. But something kept bugging him. He scanned the entry again, his eyes tracing every letter and number. And then he saw it. Tucked away at the very end of her data string, next to the internal routing codes, was a small 5-character annotation he had never seen before, O Alpha. It wasn't a standard code. SSR codes. Special service requests were 4 letters long and usually self-explanatory, like WCHR for a wheelchair request or VGML for a vegetarian meal. This was different. It looked more like a military designation or something from a spy movie. His intrigue now fully reignited, he tried to cross-reference the code in the Aura Wings Digital Employee Handbook. He typed O Alpha into the search bar. The result came back instantly. Access denied. Classification level 9 required. Mark's blood ran cold. Classification level 9 was reserved for the highest echelons of corporate security and the executive board. A standard flight purser like him was only a level 4. What in God's name was a code requiring that level of clearance doing on the manifest of a woman in a middle seat in economy? He found Chloe preparing coffee in the galley. He pulled her aside, lowering his voice. Chloe, a word. He showed her the tablet. Look at this. Seat 34B, Serafina Hayes. Chloe scanned the entry. I don't see anything. Here, Mark said, pointing to the annotation. O Alpha. I tried to look it up. It's level 9 classified. Chloe's eyes widened. Level 9. That's CEO level. Exactly, Mark hissed. First, she knows the internal workings of our A350's entertainment system better than we do. Now this. Who is she? They both fell silent, their minds racing through the possibilities. A government air marshal? No, they have their own specific, albeit secret codes. A tech consultant doing a secret audit. Maybe. A journalist. The thought made Mark shudder. What should we do? Chloe whispered, glancing nervously toward the main cabin, where Serafina was once again quietly reading her book, as if none of this had happened. I don't know, Mark admitted. His entire professional instinct was to leave it alone, not to poke the hornet's nest. But his curiosity and a growing sense of dread were overriding his caution. For now, we do nothing. Treat her with the utmost respect. Get her anything she wants. Don't mention any of this, but watch her. Just watch her. From that moment on, Serafina Hayes became the center of a silent, intense scrutiny. Chloe offered her complimentary wine, which she politely declined. Mark, on his next pass through the cabin, made a point of stopping by her row. Ma'am, is there anything at all I can get for you? A pillow? A blanket? He asked, his tone now infused with a deference that bordered on fearful. Serafina looked up from her book, a faint, knowing smile playing on her lips. It was a smile that suggested she was perfectly aware of the silent panic she was causing. No, thank you, Mark, she said, her voice soft but clear. I'm perfectly comfortable. The fact that she used his name just as she had with Chloe sent another jolt through him. He had his name tag on, of course, but passengers rarely used it. And coming from her at this moment, it sounded less like a pleasantry and more like a confirmation. A confirmation that she saw everything and everyone. Mark retreated, his heart pounding. The mystery of the woman in 34B had just deepened into an abyss. As the flight began its descent towards London, the cabin lights slowly brightened and the crew prepared for landing. The tension that had been simmering for hours was about to boil over. Tiffany Sterling, having lost her auction for the Chanel bag, was in a foul mood and seemed determined to have one last moment of drama before they touched down. It began with a frantic rustling in her suite, followed by a rising cry of panic. My bracelet. It's gone. Mark and Chloe were at her side in an instant. My diamond bracelet. The Cartier. Love bracelet with the pavé diamonds. It's worth over $50,000, she exclaimed, her voice thick with manufactured hysteria. She was patting down her seat, rummaging through her Hermès Birkin bag. It was right here on my wrist. Someone must have taken it while I was sleeping. Her eyes, sharp and accusatory, immediately darted out of her suite and scanned the first-class cabin. Then they narrowed, looking further down the aisle toward the economy section. The plane has been secure since we took off, Mark said, trying to be diplomatic. Perhaps it just slipped off Miss Sterling. If you could retrace your steps. I know what happened. Tiffany interrupted, her voice rising to a crescendo. She stood up and pointed a trembling finger down the aisle in the general direction of row 34. It was her. The woman from before. The one who was lurking around. She was probably scoping out the cabin. A gasp went through the nearby passengers. The accusation was monstrous, baseless, and dripping with prejudice. Serafina, who had been listening to the entire exchange, slowly closed her book and placed it in the seat-back pocket in front of her. She remained seated, her posture calm and erect. Mark was aghast. "Ms. Sterling, you can't possibly make an accusation like that. There is absolutely no evidence." "Evidence," Tiffany laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Look at her. And look at me. It's simple jealousy. People like that see something shiny and they just can't help themselves. I want her bags searched. Now." The situation was spiraling out of control. An accusation of felony theft at 30,000 feet was a nightmare scenario. Standard procedure dictated that the captain be notified immediately. Mark spoke into his headset. His voice strained. "Captain, we have a Code 3 situation in the first-class cabin. A passenger is reporting a high-value theft and is making accusations against another passenger." A few minutes later, the captain, a tall, authoritative man named David Harrison, emerged from the cockpit, his face a grim mask of concern. He was followed by the purser. "What's going on here?" Captain Harrison asked, his voice commanding immediate silence. Tiffany launched into her story, embellishing it with sobs and dramatic gestures. "And then I saw her," she finished, pointing directly at Serafina, who was now standing calmly in the aisle. "She's the one who took it." All eyes turned to Serafina. She was the picture of tranquility in the eye of a hurricane. Captain Harrison approached her, his expression serious but professional. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Harrison. We have a serious allegation here. I'm going to have to ask you a few questions." It was at this moment that Serafina Hayes decided the audit was over. She held up a hand, a simple gesture that nonetheless stopped the captain mid-sentence. She looked past him, making eye contact with Mark, then Chloe. She then turned her gaze to Tiffany, her eyes no longer calm and observational, but as hard and cold as diamond drill bits. Finally, she looked at Captain Harrison. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, yet it carried an unmistakable weight of absolute authority that cut through the tension in the cabin. "Captain Harrison," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Please return to the cockpit. Use the satellite phone to contact the chairman of the Aura Wings board, Alistair Finch, on his private number. Tell him that Serafina Hayes is on flight 712. We have a Code 3 initiated by passenger Tiffany Sterling in Suite 1A, and that I am invoking Protocol Omega." The captain stared at her, utterly baffled. The name Alistair Finch was one every employee knew. He was the semi-reclusive, legendary founder of the airline. But the rest of it, Protocol Omega, her own name. The sheer command in her voice was alien. "Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but..." Serafina's eyes narrowed. "You have a choice, Captain. You can stand here and argue with me while we descend into a legal and logistical nightmare upon landing, or you can go make that call and find out exactly who I am. I suggest you choose wisely." There was a moment of profound silence. Something in her unwavering gaze, in the steel of her voice, convinced him. He had seen panicked passengers, angry passengers, and entitled passengers. This was none of those. This was power. Without another word, Captain Harrison turned and walked back to the cockpit. The entire cabin held its breath. Tiffany Sterling looked momentarily uncertain, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. Mark and Chloe exchanged a look of pure terror. The cryptic O Alpha code suddenly making a horrifying amount of sense. Less than 2 minutes later, Captain Harrison re-emerged. His face was ashen, drained of all color. He walked not to Tiffany, but directly to Serafina. He stood before her, his posture ramrod straight, like a soldier addressing a 5-star general. "Miss Hayes," he said, his voice trembling almost imperceptibly. "My profound apologies for the disturbance. The chairman is on the line for you. He asked me to convey that the plane, the crew, and all company assets are entirely at your disposal. What are your orders?" The captain's words detonated in the cabin like a silent shockwave. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. In the space of a single sentence, Serafina Hayes had gone from being the accused to being the ultimate authority. The flight crew stared, mouths agape, as the world they knew tilted on its axis. Tiffany Sterling's face contorted through a rapid series of emotions. Disbelief, confusion, dawning horror, and finally, sheer panic. "Ms. Hayes. What is this? Some kind of joke?" Serafina ignored her completely. She addressed the captain. "Thank you, Captain Harrison. Please inform Mr. Finch that I will call him upon landing. For now, my orders are simple. First, instruct the crew to conduct a thorough search of Suite 1A and all of Ms. Sterling's personal belongings. I have a feeling the lost bracelet will be found." She then turned her gaze to the crew. It was a look of intense, professional appraisal. "Chloe," she said, her voice softening slightly. "Throughout this flight, you have shown kindness, empathy, and professionalism, even when dealing with extreme provocation. You treated a passenger in economy with the same dignity as a passenger in first class. That is the true spirit of Aura Wings. You are to be commended." Chloe looked as if she might faint from relief and shock. Serafina's eyes then moved to Mark. "Mark, your record says you have been with this airline for 17 years. You are experienced and you follow procedure. But today, your procedure was to appease a bully at the expense of civility and the comfort of other passengers. You allowed this situation to escalate because you were intimidated by a display of wealth. You failed to protect your fellow crew members and your passengers from abuse. We will be discussing your future at length." Mark visibly deflated, the color draining from his face. He could only nod, unable to speak. Finally, Serafina turned her full, undivided attention to Tiffany Sterling, who was now backed against the wall of her suite, looking trapped. A junior flight attendant, following Serafina's order, was gingerly searching Tiffany's Birkin bag. After a moment, she pulled out the glittering Cartier bracelet. "Sterling, I believe this is yours," the attendant asked timidly. Tiffany stammered, It must have fallen in there. I didn't realize." "No, I imagine you didn't," Serafina said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Serafina Hayes. My late father's investment group acquired a majority stake in Aura Wings 6 months ago. As of last Monday, I am the new CEO. I fly my own airline in economy under a different name a few times a year. I do it to see the reality of the service we provide, not the polished version we present to the board. Today's flight has been exceptionally informative. Each word landed like a physical blow." Tiffany's face was a mask of pure terror. "Now about your name." Serafina continued, her tone becoming even colder. "Sterling. That's not a common name. You wouldn't happen to be related to Sterling and Sons Construction, would you?" Tiffany could only manage a weak, terrified nod. "My father. He's the chairman," A slow, cold smile spread across Serafina's face. It was not a pleasant sight. I thought so. Sterling & Sons is the primary contractor for our new multi-billion-dollar expansion at JFK's Terminal 4. A massive project. Your father's legacy, I believe. The contract, as I recall from the briefing last week, is up for final review and renewal this Friday. Serafina pulled out a simple, unassuming smartphone from her pocket. It was not the latest model. She tapped the screen a few times, then held it to her ear. Tiffany watched, trembling as her entire world began to crumble. "Jessica." "It's Serafina," she said into the phone. "Yes, I'm still in the air. I need you to do something for me. Contact the legal department. I want you to invoke Clause 28B in the Sterling & Sons JFK contract, the moral turpitude and brand detriment clause. Terminate the contract, effective immediately. And while you're at it, please add Miss Tiffany Sterling to our permanent system-wide no-fly list. Thank you." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Tiffany Sterling let out a strangled gasp. This was more than just being kicked off a flight. This was the ruin of her family's empire. Decades of work, billions of dollars, all vaporized because of her behavior over a glass of champagne and a frozen movie screen. "No," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "You can't. Please. My father, it'll destroy him." Serafina looked at her, and for the first time there was not a trace of anger or judgment in her eyes, only a profound, weary sadness. "Your father's company isn't being destroyed by me, Ms. Sterling," she said, her voice resonating with finality. "It's being destroyed by you. You built a gilded cage of privilege and convinced yourself it was the whole world. You believe wealth gives you the right to be cruel. But true wealth, the kind that lasts, is measured in character. And in that regard, you are bankrupt. Now please return to your seat. We will be landing shortly." Tiffany collapsed into her leather suite, her sobs the only sound in the utterly silent cabin. Karma hadn't just knocked on her door. It had kicked it off its hinges and brought the whole house down with it. The moment the wheels of Flight 712 kissed the tarmac at London Heathrow, a palpable shift occurred within the pressurized cabin. The familiar rumble and gentle deceleration that usually signaled the end of a journey and the beginning of a holiday or a business trip felt different. It was the sound of a countdown reaching zero. A tense, unnerving silence had fallen over the aircraft, punctuated only by the whine of the engines spooling down. Every passenger from the front of first class to the last row of economy was acutely aware that this was not a normal landing. All eyes darted between the stoic, serene figure of Serafina Hayes, still standing calmly in the aisle, and the crumpled, sobbing form of Tiffany Sterling in Suite 1A. As the plane taxied with excruciating slowness towards the terminal, Captain David Harrison's voice, now devoid of its usual cheerful cadence, came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now on the ground at Heathrow. For your safety and comfort, and due to a passenger-related incident, we ask that you remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened until the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate and the sign has been switched off. We will require all passengers to remain on board until airport authorities have cleared the aircraft. Thank you for your cooperation and your patience." The words airport authorities sent a fresh wave of shock through the cabin. This was no longer just a case of an entitled passenger being put in her place. This had escalated. Tiffany Sterling looked up, her face a grotesque mask of ruined makeup and sheer terror. The reality of her situation was finally crashing down on her with the force of a tidal wave. She had manufactured a crisis for her own amusement and entitlement, and in doing so had triggered an avalanche that was now set to bury her. The gentle bump as the plane docked with the jet bridge was like the sound of a gavel falling. A sharp official knock echoed on the cabin door. Mark, his face pale and clammy, moved automatically to open it. Standing in the doorway were not the familiar smiling faces of the Heathrow ground crew, but two stone-faced London Metropolitan Police officers in high-visibility jackets, and an imposing man in a sharp suit, whose ID badge identified him as Arthur Cole, head of corporate security for Aura Wings Europe. Arthur Cole's eyes scanned the cabin, immediately locking onto Serafina. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement before turning his attention to the waiting officers. Captain Harrison met them at the threshold. Captain Harrison, the lead officer, asked, "Yes, that's me. The passenger in question is in Suite 1A, he confirmed, gesturing toward Tiffany. The officers and the security chief stepped aboard their presence, seeming to shrink the already confined space. They walked with a heavy, purposeful tread down the plush first-class carpet, stopping directly in front of Tiffany's suite. Ms. Tiffany Sterling, the officer asked, his voice a calm, professional baritone that offered no room for argument. Tiffany could only manage a choked, whimpering nod. "We'd like a word with you regarding a disturbance reported during the flight," the officer continued. "The report mentions a false accusation of theft and sustained verbal abuse towards crew and another passenger. Please collect your personal belongings. You'll be accompanying us." Tiffany's last shred of defiance sputtered out. She had no more threats to make, no powerful father to invoke. She had already played that card and lost the entire deck. With trembling hands, she fumbled to gather her expensive purse and coat. The entire cabin watched in dead silence as she was formally escorted from her seat of luxury. Her walk of shame was a long one past the now pitying gazes of the other first-class passengers and down the narrow aisle of the economy cabin where hundreds of eyes followed her every move. She kept her head down, her platinum blonde hair hiding her face, but she could feel the weight of their judgment. They were the very people she had dismissed as insignificant, the sardines in the back of the bus, and now they were the silent witnesses to her utter humiliation. As she was led across the jet bridge, a cold London wind whipping at her, she glanced out a window. Her gaze fell upon a vast construction site adjacent to the terminal. A massive, half-finished building was draped in scaffolding, and on its side hung a colossal banner, its blue and white logo illuminated by the harsh airport lights. Sterling & Sons Construction Building, the future of travel. It was her father's magnum opus, the crowning achievement of his career. Seeing it now felt like a physical blow, a final brutal twist of the knife. It wasn't just a sign. It was a monument to everything she had just single-handedly destroyed. Back on the plane, once the door was sealed again, Serafina took the intercom handset from a stunned flight attendant. She pressed the button, her voice filling the cabin not with the detached authority of a CEO, but with the warm sincerity of a fellow traveler. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Serafina Hayes, on behalf of everyone at Aura Wings. I want to extend my deepest, most sincere apologies for the unacceptable disruption you all experienced on this flight. Travel should be a pleasant experience, not a stressful one, and today we failed to provide that for you. What you witnessed was a failure of our culture, and as the new leader of this airline, I take full responsibility. To thank you for your immense patience, and as a small gesture of our commitment to earning back your trust, Aura Wings will be issuing every passenger on this flight a full refund for their ticket. This will be processed automatically within the next 48 hours. Thank you again, and we hope you have a safe and pleasant stay in London." She clicked off the intercom. For a moment, there was silence. Then a single passenger began to clap. Another joined in, and then another, until the entire cabin erupted in a wave of spontaneous, heartfelt applause. As the crew finally began the disembarkation process, several passengers made a point to stop by, where she stood, shaking her hand, thanking her and sharing their own stories of frustrating travel experiences. She listened to every single one, her expression one of genuine empathy and concern. An hour later, the last passenger had gone, leaving behind a silent, empty aircraft that felt more like a stage after the play had ended. The cleaning crews waited patiently on the jet bridge, held back by Arthur Cole. The flight crew, exhausted and emotionally drained, gathered in the first-class cabin, as Serafina had requested. The harsh fluorescent cleaning lights had been turned on, casting long shadows and bleaching all the color from the luxurious cabin, making it feel sterile and clinical. Serafina stood before them, her demeanor now shifting from public leader to private manager. "Today was a test," she began, her voice resonating in the quiet space. "Not one I designed, but one that unfolded organically. It was a test of the culture of this company. And what I saw was a culture that is fundamentally broken. It's a culture that has become subservient to a perceived hierarchy of wealth. It's a culture that empowers the abusive and silences the abused. It's a culture that has forgotten its most sacred mission to provide safe, dignified, and respectful passage to every single person who steps onto our planes, whether they paid $10,000 for a suite or $500 for a middle seat in the back." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Our founder, Alistair Finch, started this airline with one principle: the sky belongs to everyone. We've lost sight of that. We started chasing 5-star ratings from a select few and forgot about the human experience of the majority. That ends today." She turned her gaze to Chloe, whose eyes were wide and brimming with nervous tears. "Chloe," Serafina said, a genuine warmth infusing her voice. "From the moment I boarded, I watched you. I saw you handle Ms. Sterling's initial aggression with grace. I saw you offer a quiet apology to me after I was insulted. I saw you use a small act of kindness, a glass of water and some biscuits, as a form of silent resistance. You never lost your composure or your empathy. You saw a person, not a seat number. That is the true spirit of Aura Wings. That is the leadership quality I want to build this airline's future on. Effective immediately, you are promoted to purser. But I'm also reassigning you. You'll be heading our new in-flight service training division. I don't want you to just teach procedures. I want you to help us build a new curriculum from the ground up, one focused on emotional intelligence, conflict de-escalation, and passenger advocacy. I want you to teach our crews how to be guardians of our culture, not just servers of meals." Chloe let out a sob, a hand flying to her mouth. "Me? But I've only been with the company for 3 years. I'm not. You are exactly what we need," Serafina finished gently. "Experience is valuable, but character is invaluable. You have it in abundance." Then Serafina's eyes moved to Mark. He stood stiffly, his face a mask of shame, bracing for the inevitable. "Mark," she said, her voice hardening. "I pulled your service record mid-flight. 17 years of service, dozens of commendations for efficiency and professionalism. But I also saw a disturbing trend over the last 2 years, a sharp increase in formal passenger complaints filed against you, not for rudeness, but for what they consistently describe as dismissiveness and failure to act in situations involving disruptive premium cabin passengers. This wasn't a one-time mistake, Mark. It was the culmination of a pattern of choosing the path of least resistance. You were not a leader today. You were an enabler. You saw a bully, and instead of protecting your crew and your other passengers, you appeased her, hoping she would simply go away. Your inaction created the environment for this entire disaster to unfold. Mark flinched as if struck. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but no words came. He simply closed it and stared at the floor. The truth of her assessment undeniable. So you have a choice, Serafina continued, her tone clinical. Option 1, you can resign. Given your long service, I will authorize a generous severance package, and you can leave with your pension intact. We will part ways, no questions asked. Option 2, you accept a 6-month demotion to flight attendant. You will be enrolled in the new training program that Chloe will be designing. You will learn from the ground up what it means to lead with integrity, not just with a rulebook. You will learn that your duty is to the safety and well-being of all 256 souls on this plane, not just the one with the loudest voice. At the end of 6 months, your performance will be evaluated. If you pass, you will be reinstated as purser. If you fail, your employment will be terminated. The choice is yours. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of a man's career. Mark stood for a long, agonizing moment. He was a proud man, and the humiliation of being demoted and trained by a junior colleague was immense. But as he looked at Serafina, he saw no malice in her eyes, only a demand for accountability. He saw the truth. He had lost his way. With a deep, shuddering breath, he lifted his head and met her gaze. I'll enter the program, he said, his voice hoarse but steady. I want to learn. Serafina gave a single sharp nod of approval. Good. That is the first step on a long road. Finally, she addressed the rest of the crew. This is a message for all of you, and for every employee at this airline. The age of appeasement is over. I will always have your back when you do the right thing. If you de-escalate a situation, if you refuse to tolerate abuse, if you stand up for a passenger being mistreated, you will be protected. You are empowered to be the guardians of this airline soul. This is your company. Let's start acting like it. Weeks later, Serafina Hayes stood on a chilly, wind-swept balcony overlooking the construction at JFK's Terminal 4. The crisp autumn air bit at her cheeks. Below her, the massive Sterling & Sons banner was gone. In its place, a new sign was being hoisted by a giant crane. Its logo simpler, less ostentatious, Phoenix Builders Cooperative. An employee-owned firm she had deliberately sought out. Her phone buzzed. It was an internal memo from Robert Sterling's legal team, forwarded to her by her assistant. It was a groveling, desperate plea to reconsider the contract termination, citing decades of partnership and blaming the incident on his daughter's inexcusable and anomalous behavior. Serafina read it, then deleted it without a reply. The time for talk was over. The time for action was now. Her other line rang. The screen displayed Chloe's name. Serafina Chloe's voice came through buzzing with an energy and confidence that was worlds away from the anxious flight attendant she had been just a few weeks prior. The first class of the Advocacy and Integrity program just graduated. Mark was top of the class. He gave the closing speech. He talked about how serving a cup of coffee to a passenger in economy with dignity was more important than serving champagne to a bully in first class. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. A genuine warm smile spread across Serafina's face as she watched the new sign click securely into place. The flight had been a trial by fire, but from its ashes, something new and far stronger was beginning to rise. It would be an airline built not on the fragile illusion of luxury, but on the unshakable foundation of respect, a respect that extended from the cockpit to the very last row, ensuring that every soul who flew with them felt seen, valued, and safe. The sky, she thought, was finally starting to belong to everyone again. Today's story is a powerful reminder that a person's worth is never determined by their seat number, their clothes, or the balance in their bank account. True class is about character integrity and how you treat people who can do nothing for you. Tiffany Sterling learned that lesson the hard way, discovering that her privilege was a fragile bubble easily burst by the quiet power of the very person she disdained. Serafina Hayes proved that the best leaders don't just sit in a corner office. They walk among their people, listening, observing, and working to build something better from the ground up. What did you think of Tiffany's shocking karma? Let us know in the comments below. If you believe that kindness and respect are the ultimate currency, please hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more dramatic storytelling that will keep you on the edge of your seat.